Hello and welcome to Stories in Harmony. I'm your host, Laura Ferrero, a journalist, marketing strategist, and brand storyteller who helps artists and entrepreneurs most powerfully share their brand stories to magnetize their ideal audience and grow their business. Today on Stories in Harmony, we are joined by Trish Hossain, also known as the artist TRISHES. TRISHES is a true multi-hyphenate, singer-songwriter, performance, and visual artist who was raised in Trinidad and moved to Southern California when she was very young. In our conversation today, we talk about what it was like for Trish being a young woman of color, growing up in a place where she didn't really see many role models who looked like her doing what she wanted to do. We also talk about her journey to become the incredible and confident artist that she is today, and how the encouragement of just one person can change the trajectory of your whole life. I really enjoyed our chat, and I hope you do too, so sit back and here's my conversation with TRISHES. We are here today with Trish Hossain, who's also known as TRISHES, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited to chat with you. So I thought we would dive in to, I guess, the early days when you were young. I know that you were born in Trinidad.
So actually, I grew up in Trinidad. I was born in Boston.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, but I only lived in Boston for like a couple months. So, yeah, my parents were in college. And so I was born in Boston. And then when I was very, very tiny, we moved back to Trinidad. And so I lived in Trinidad until I was 7.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's your earliest memory would be.
My earliest memories were definitely in Trinidad. Yeah.
And then you moved to Southern California when you were 7, San Diego, is that right?
There was like a brief stint in New Jersey that I don't super remember. Okay. But yeah, I went through middle school and high school in Southern California.
Okay. And I imagine, what was it like coming to Southern California from Trinidad and adjusting to what I imagine is such a different culture?
I mean, gosh, it was a lot of things. I've been really exploring the idea of, at first I was really thinking about how I've internalized sort of structural racism and white supremacy in the United States. And then when I started thinking about that and writing about that, I realized that, I have sort of been internalizing those things even before I came to the United States, because Trinidad was a British colony. And then going back further than that, I'm half Indian, but like Indo-Caribbean Indian. So, and then going back further, India was a British colony at the time my ancestors left there. So I've been thinking a lot about that generational trauma, even that I started to understand and contextualize when I moved to the U.S. So like things that aren't as explicit in Trinidad, but that exist, like colorism and like hierarchies of language and academia and stuff that exists there. But moving here, seeing things a little more explicitly was really interesting. So it was odd for me to just be surrounded by white people when I grew up in a really diverse environment where it wasn't necessarily that everyone looked like me. It was that everyone looked different, and that was very normal. Yeah. So there were a lot of things that happened personally, but also just in like absorbing media that really like informed my my positionality, what I thought was possible for me, what I thought my role in society was, and things like that.
Right. Yeah, I saw that you said in another interview that you felt like American media kind of, if I have this right, gives messages that brown people and women specifically should remain quiet and maybe not take up too much space. Is that one of the messages you were receiving, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I think there's this really that a lot of brown women are often put into like a sidekick role, or brown and black women were put into that role. And obviously there's a lot more representation now than when I was growing up. I still wouldn't say it's proportionate representation, but like it's like very exciting for me to see like Never Have I Ever, that like Mindy Kaling show, and representation of young brown women being complex characters has been cool. But mostly I was a kid that wanted to be a singer, and I never saw anyone on TV that looked like me. I would like watch these Disney Channel concerts, and like I never saw anyone that looked like me. And then at one point, sort of that pathway was like carved in my mind, where I was like, oh, like, well, that must mean that's not my role here. That's not my role in this society. And that made me like, it's not that I didn't want to be a musician. It made me be embarrassed to want that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so how did you, because now I feel that you're so bold and just really, putting yourself out there in such creative, amazing ways. And you would never know that to watch you perform now, because you seem so fearless on stage. How did you overcome that or transcend that?
I think it was really one woman, a friend of my mother's, a white woman. She heard me, and this was probably when I was like 12. So I've always wanted to be a musician. But then when I was like 7 or 8, I was like, oh, that's not a thing that you can want. But when I was 12, I was playing piano and singing a song, and one of my mom's friends was like, you're really good at that. You should do that. There was like a talent show. She's like, you should do the talent show. And I was like, can I do the talent show? Like, so it was interesting because it was sort of like this permission from whiteness that, I was like, oh, I guess if she thinks I can do the talent show, I can do the talent show. And I did it. And people were just so connected to it, and so like moved by this thing I did, that I was like, wow, like, okay, I can do this. Like this means something to people. And yeah, it's interesting really that made all the difference to me, was this one person telling me I should do it.
Isn't that interesting? Because I have a similar experience in some ways. When I was about 12, my 6th grade teacher, who happened to be a black woman, I remember she wrote in my yearbook, you should consider becoming a writer or a journalist. And it just like, and when that comes from somebody you admire and respect, it means so much, and it just opened up a whole world of possibilities. It was like, oh, I could actually do this as a profession, something that I love and that seems to come naturally to me. And it just, it never clicked before. So it's wonderful to have someone.
Yeah.
I was reading also that there was an experience you had when you were young, that someone stole some song lyrics that you'd been writing, and like read them out in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
And you were embarrassed.
Yeah.
Can you explain what happened, and then like how that affected the work you were doing, and when you were able to get over it?
That was when I was so young. So first of all, what was I writing about? But yeah, I had this like little notebook from the dollar store that was like covered in roses, and I would write all my song lyrics in them. This was when I was like very heavy into my Spice Girls phase. And someone just took it and read it at the cafeteria, and I was really embarrassed, and I didn't write songs again for like years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, maturity was probably a part of it, but how did you find the confidence to go back to it?
Man, I'm not sure I remember. I think it was just something that came out of me. I know I started taking piano lessons, and more so than playing or singing, sort of that expression of self in writing came most naturally to me. So I don't think it was, I think it was just after years that it just started like coming out again.
Yeah, I feel like if it's something that's really within you and that's part of your path, you can't suppress it for long. I
Yeah.
mean, ideally.
Yeah.
So, and then, obviously you don't just sing and write songs. You do a lot of other things, spoken word, visual art. And you did a TED talk recently about how, Western society has dictated for many years that you're only supposed to do one thing, and that is a myth that you debunk. Can you talk about how you found the confidence to express yourself through so many mediums, and more about why we should do that?
Yeah, I think I am so concept driven that I started really in music. That's my most probably natural form of expression. But along with that, it was always concept based. It was always really focused on the lyrical aspect of songwriting. And I would write these songs that were essentially thesis statements of ideas, of conclusions I came to. And I really just wanted to elaborate on those thesis statements. So I started doing spoken word to kind of involve my audience deeper into these concepts. And with the visual art, it was the same thing. Actually, a mentor of mine encouraged me to do that. And then I found it was also like a great way to extend these concepts, to explore them further and more deeply. And I feel super privileged that I had the time and space to explore all of those things. But also, having that time allowed me to even, question the idea of only doing one thing. And I think it's a conclusion that more of us would come to if we had that time and space, but that isn't the reality of our society. For a lot of people, like, our society just isn't livable. Like, most people don't make a living wage and are spending all of their creativity and their mental energy into these jobs where they're exploited. So I think it was really just that I had the privilege of space and time. And also, I don't know what it was about how I was raised, but despite having those like years of self-consciousness as a child, I have this idea that I'm like capable of doing whatever I want to. And I think that's a testament to however my parents raised me, but like I do feel very capable. I think, you know, my dad would he would tell me about concepts that were like beyond my years, that I wouldn't necessarily understand. But what that like really instilled in me is that, well, he believes that I'm this capable. Like he doesn't, you know, like I obviously he viewed me as a kid, but very much saw me as an individual, as an intellectual, and yeah, that was really instilled in me that like I was, you know, a lot of the things I felt that I couldn't do, it wasn't that I felt like I couldn't do it because I wasn't capable of doing it. I felt that there wasn't a role and a place in society for me to do it, but I'd always felt like I had the ability to do it given my intellect and given my tenacity and given my work ethic.
Wow, that's really wonderful that your parents or your father instilled that in you. I've found oftentimes that's the exception and not the rule. And even if you have wonderful parents, like I have amazing parents, but I still find, I'm not sure what it's based on, but you know, certain things in my upbringing, I think they still influence me in wondering, like, am I capable of that? Can I do that? And you just kind of self-doubt creeps in. And usually I've been able to put it on a back burner, but not without significant effort.
Yeah.
So does that resistance ever come up for you? Or is it just kind of like, I got this?
I always just feel like I'll figure it out. I'm in the process of writing my first book, and I don't know what I'm doing, but I feel confident that I can do it. I think I also like don't really buy into the myth of exceptionalism. You know, there was all of those like Elon Musk texts that came out, and people are like, is this really how billionaires like talk to each other? There's this myth that it's this great American myth because it really like reinforces capitalism and our social structure. But that the best of the best, those are the people that do the things, right? When it's like all of us are very capable of doing so much more than we're like really allowed to do. So I think part of it was I never bought that like idea that there are, of course, exceptional people and people I look up to, but there are a lot of people who are very successful because of their, you know, because of their circumstances, because of luck, because they had the confidence. And so sometimes I'm just like, if anyone can do it, I can do it. Like, you know, like I might not be as like prolific or brilliant as the writers that I look up to, but I think if I have something that is valuable to say, I think I can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very healthy outlook, I think, and you know, level of self-confidence. And something that was liberating for me is, I think I heard it originally from the author Elizabeth Gilbert, but I've heard it repeated quite a lot, that done is better than good. And so I really took that to heart because I finished a book during the pandemic, finished writing a book.
Yeah.
And it was my first fiction novel. And it was something I had been working on for a long time, but never finished because I would keep going back and revising it and thinking, oh, this isn't good enough. Like, I'm not writing like Toni Morrison. It's not worth anything, you know? And then I thought, oh, wait, no, you know, I stopped revising. I just kept moving forward in the first draft and stopped that critical voice in my head that said, this isn't excellent. Like, okay, it's done. It's good enough. And of course I, you know, did a lot of revisions after that, but it was very liberating. And it gave me the confidence to be able to move forward and to know, like, not everyone can write like Toni Morrison, but that doesn't mean they don't have something to contribute, something very valuable.
Yeah, I think it says a lot about how we value each other in society that is sad, because it gives people the impressions that their contributions to society can't be simple or quiet to be impactful. And that's just not the reality of how we operate as humans. So I think yeah, I wish more people that don't have that outlook had it. A lot of the people that do are able to a lot of the people that have the confidence to do it are sort of the ones that we've like heard from a million times already. So it's we've all sort of been taught our roles in different ways.
Telling your own stories can be challenging, especially if you're more introverted or soft-spoken. Putting yourself out there can feel unnatural and uncomfortable. But the thing is, if you don't put yourself out there and share your stories, you won't be able to share your gifts and your magic with the people who really need them. Trust me, I know it's been a journey because I don't feel comfortable at all being the center of attention. That said, the things that I want to help people with have motivated me to put myself out there in new ways, and I'd love to be able to help you do the same. As a branding and storytelling strategist, I will help you identify and powerfully share your most compelling stories to magnetize your ideal audience to you and increase your business. We'll work together in a 3-month coaching program where we'll meet 3 times a month, and I will help guide you to find your most powerful and compelling stories, even if you feel that you don't have an interesting story to tell. These are the things that will connect you on an emotional level with your ideal audience and that will set you apart from everybody else that might be doing something similar to what you're doing, because I can guarantee the stories you have to tell and the ways that you are doing it are completely unique, and that's what your audience really wants to hear. If you're not yet ready for a 3-month coaching package, I'm offering a special introductory offer for 1 month of working together, which would be 3 sessions for just $4.99. Information about both programs can be found below. I would love to help work with you to share your messages and your magic. Yeah, and I read another quote from you about kind of just, how people need to really lean into who they are. Not everybody is like that outgoing, kind of loud and aggressive person. There are other people, I guess, like me, who are more soft-spoken and maybe, identify as more introverted. But, so it might take a little more effort, and I feel like, I'm putting myself out there more when I'm promoting myself. That doesn't come naturally to me, but I feel that, what I have to say and offer and helping other people tell their stories is very valuable. And I have to remind myself of that when I see really, someone who seems very naturally confident on camera or on stage doing what they do. It doesn't mean that what, someone else who isn't that way has to offer is any less valuable.
Right.
Just different, tools to work with.
Yeah, it's just what's rewarded in our culture is that is the loudness and the overt showing of strength and things like that. And I don't think it's that way everywhere. I think, other cultures and indigenous cultures sort of understand the ecosystem of how our interpersonal relationships work more.
Yeah, and things like honoring your elders, which we don't have a lot of in this culture.
Yeah.
It's so crazy to me.
It's interesting because it's the one like vulnerable community that we would like to be in, like that we would hope to be in one day. If all goes well, we will be part of this vulnerable community. And it's just like a very individualistic approach that it feels like is the most lacking thing in, American culture.
It's true. Yeah, my father is from Spain, and I spent some time living there. And so, I loved my sister, and I spent a summer there and in Sevilla taking flamenco lessons and just enjoying being there. And every day when we would walk to our flamenco lesson, we would see people probably in their 80s and 90s in these little plazas and these cafes just playing chess, interacting with families and people of all ages. And, it's a gathering place and everything's very walkable. So they're part of the community. They're not relegated to a house or a home somewhere.
Yeah.
And I thought, I want to retire here or someplace like it.
Yeah.
Because, and they're an integral part of the community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that way about my upbringing too. Is like I feel like I was really raised by a community that included my grandparents, and I don't see that often here. But I feel like elders are just generally incorporated more in Trinidad because children are raised by a village, which I think is like how it should be, really. Yeah. And without that community mindset, that we all need to take care of each other, especially our most vulnerable. That's just like, it's this huge lack we feel, but we don't know we feel, or I think some people don't know.
Yeah, it's like when you're so used to one way of being, you don't even realize sometimes that there are other alternatives that are probably much better in some ways. Yeah. And speaking of vulnerable communities, I feel like that's a good segue to some of your activism working with refugee communities. And also, this isn't a vulnerable community per se, but a community that I think I've heard that you've been working with too is Rock and Roll Camp for Girls. So young women who want to become musicians. Can you talk, I guess, about both of those? I know they're quite different, but about your work with those communities and organizations.
Yeah, so I kind of like hop around where I feel like I see a need. Like I like filling in gaps in sort of volunteer situations. But the refugee work, I've helped resettle a handful of refugees in Los Angeles. And that was just important to me because I understood the sense of isolation of being in a completely new culture. And I think even though, my family moved to the US by choice, there was still really that sense of isolation that I'm not sure ever really went away. And I think when the Syrian refugee crisis started, I was like, okay, I want to figure out how I can be helpful. Being helpful is like how I treat my anxiety, essentially. So there's no selfless act. So when I see things that are happening that are really like making me like anxious, like this is the only thing that will make that go away is if I'm like, okay, how am I able to be helpful in this situation? So I looked into different ways I could do that, and that was really fulfilling. I also went to Tijuana and worked with asylum seekers down there for a little bit. And that was really fulfilling. All of these things, not like I had a specialty, like not that I had any specific knowledge. I was really just filling in gaps, driving people around, watching kids, helping people fill out paperwork, like really simple things, but really, really fulfilling work. And last week I got to perform at the IRC rescue dinner, which they have once a year for their donors. And that was really incredible. Got to hear a lot of amazing stories and hear about the work they're doing.
Can you give just a brief overview of what IRC does?
Yeah, International Rescue Committee, they work with refugees and asylum seekers. They are the focus of the dinner was on Afghanistan, and there were some different locations in Africa, and they were really talking about hope behind the headlines was the title of the dinner, and really talking about how these headlines fade pretty fast. So I mean, the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan more than a year ago, and there's still girls still just don't have education, even though they've sort of been promised that was going to happen. There's been all of these weird, I mean, it's a crazy circumstance, but a lot of things have happened since then, but a lot of us just have forgotten about it. So the IRC, they really set up shop. They're like not leaving. They're not there for just like immediate aid. And I really love that they do that. So just a great organization to volunteer with or to donate to. And Rock and Roll Camp for Girls, I did that for a couple summers, and that was just really fun. I think for me, a big part of that is that like I wanted the representation in music that I lacked as a child. Yeah. And I feel like that organization does a great job of offering that to young women and girls.
That's wonderful. And how did you go about involving yourself and finding out how to do that?
Everyone, it's so interesting because people ask me all the time, like, how did you get involved in that? And it's like, oh, I Googled it and I called them. It's
like, what can I do to help, basically?
Yeah, it's just calling places, seeing if they need volunteers. I think people are really, some people can be really intimidated about volunteer work, and it's like you will be useful. Like, I think people feel like they maybe need some sort of like credentials or specialties, but it's like you're a human being. You have like value and you have use. And when I care about something, I just Google organizations I could work with and contact them.
Yeah, as simple as that. And like you were saying, with the refugees, you were able to just help them fill out forms or drive them around, things that most of us would be able to help with if we devoted the time.
Yeah. It's really just about making it a habit in your life. So I've worked with different organizations, but I think it's a habitual thing. Like it is, I have carved out this sort of like space in my mind and my life that this is like, that service is, there's friends, there's family, there's work, there's like service, there's like, it's part of it's mentally at this point a habit. But I think if people were just like, yeah, okay, once a month on every fourth Sunday, we're going to do this, then, that's in your calendar. Like once a week on this afternoon, we're going to do this. It's in your calendar. So people think they might not have the time or capacity when if they blocked out the time, they would.
Yeah, it's so true. And we were speaking earlier, you were saying that you never felt hesitant about sharing about the causes that you support and believe in publicly in your platform as an artist. But what would you say maybe to encourage some artists who do feel hesitant about alienating some of their audience by sharing about that?
I would like to hear more about their perspectives, because it's hard for me to understand that. But I guess when it comes down to it, is that there's more important things than your career, and that's like that to me is the bottom line. Like, my number one priority is, am I being helpful? Am I I don't want to say good person. I don't like a good person, bad person, like duality. But am I being helpful? Am I leaving this world better in the tiniest way? That needs to be my priority. I think that service was something that was really reinforced in my upbringing, that it was important. So yeah, I think it's just a happier way to live too. So I would say, I can't dictate anyone's values, but if I were to, I would just say that like being a good person is more important than your career. And when you do the right thing, I think things will work out for the best.
Yeah, I also think that although you might alienate somebody, you will magnetize other people to you. Not that you only want to associate with people who share your beliefs and interests, but I think because I've interviewed a few artists who said that they felt less than confident sharing about these causes for various reasons. Either maybe they didn't feel well informed enough, and that's legitimate, I get that. Yeah. Or that they would alienate people, or even their record label or manager didn't want them to do it for fear of alienating, potential consumers of their work. But I feel like that might be the case, but yet you will probably also attract other people and open your world by doing that.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's just like, we always put profit over people. And I think that has really led to the downfall of our society. Yeah. So it's just like, it's also maybe rethinking that value system. Like if you're worried you're going to have less consumers, then you are, like, by definition, you're putting profit over people or over the environment, or yeah, I think it's we all need to constantly be rethinking our value systems to be making sure that it resonates with who we actually are, as opposed to whatever roles we've felt we need to fill, whatever we've just sort of absorbed by osmosis in society.
Yeah, it's true. It's sometimes they're so deep-seated you don't even consciously realize they're there. Mm-hmm. But it is good to do that. And it's funny. Your recent album is Id, which we haven't really talked about yet. And I think that, you delve, and even your name, TRISHES, you kind of delve into some really interesting territory about different identities and I guess who you are. And I'm sure you can explain it more eloquently than I can. But can you tell us a little bit about that and, why you're called TRISHES and your latest project?
Yeah. So TRISHES I created to be able to express these like sort of contradicting thoughts and feelings I had that I put into the framework of id, ego, superego. I think, the Freudian constructs of self are such a cultural mythology for us. So it's not really lining up exactly with the Freudian definitions of these things, but I liked the framework for myself to be able to separate these thoughts, to grapple with the fact that you can want contradicting things. Like, what does that mean? So I created TRISHES, and it's I do a lot of live looping, and I do a lot of spoken word, and use a lot of vocal effects. And it was the way that I was able to express these different aspects of myself. So I put out an EP called Ego a couple years ago, or like 3 years ago now. And that focused on the push and pull between the id and the superego, and the ego in the middle. And it focuses on the things we've done or created to sort of separate ourselves from our primal self. And then last year I put out the id, which really focuses on me diving into sort of the seediest, most shameful corners of my mind, and exploring really that primal self, and then contextualizing it within the human story, because my story is everyone's story, and the it is a full length album that really is me exposing that aspect of myself and dealing with it, and grappling with ideas of morality and selfishness, and instant gratification. And it was just really a crystallization of a period in my life where I was really thinking about these the concepts of morality and ethics.
Wow, that's a lot to tackle. And I'm very interested that you said that your story is everyone's story. I believe we all have many stories to tell, and our stories are as unique as we are, yet when we share them, we find there's a certain universality to them. And can you talk a little bit about that idea?
I think the core of the human story is that we have an internal battle between who we are and who we want to be, between what we want now and what we want later. I think all external conflict comes from this internal struggle, because that friction causes fear and it causes shame. And I think those are the core feelings that manifest themselves in violence and anger and war and colonialism and all of these things. So I think the human story is that we are always grappling between the fact that we were animals and then we weren't, and like, what does that mean?
Wow. Just kind of processing that. So yeah, and I guess there are a lot of stories that I think are maybe implanted in some ways by our cultural upbringing and society that we don't even realize are a part of our story, or maybe dictating what we're doing to some degree, but they certainly do. And a lot of it is about, the stories of where we come from and the people around us. Maybe they aren't stories that we've created for ourselves, that we've told ourselves, but it's very fascinating. As humans, I think that's how we communicated from our earliest days, is through storytelling. Mm-hmm. And it still resonates, even just watching a really good movie. And you get so engrossed and involved and emotionally connected. They're very powerful. But how would you use storytelling for good?
I think any story that is authentic can be important. I think that stories being unique and individual and specific, it really shows universality, because it shows that circumstances don't need to mirror each other for sort of internal circumstances to mirror each other. And I think it gives us a lot more empathy, being told stories and being able to identify with people we otherwise wouldn't be able to. I think it's also like a danger in storytelling. So I think there is a responsible way to do it, given your background and your privilege, and really taking those things into account. But yeah, I think the most beautiful thing about telling a story is that it connects otherwise unconnected people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen that happen many times, and it's part of why I think it's very, very magical, whether it's stories, your personal story, stories on the page, or stories in your music. There's so much richness that can be found when done authentically and responsibly. And lastly, I think I'll wrap up, speaking of stories, you mentioned your book. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, this is like a brand new thing that I really just started diving into. And it is about the ways that I have internalized structural racism and white supremacy that I only really started uncovering maybe in my like mid 20s. Understanding the ways that happened to my mind generationally and in my youth and adolescence. So it's different ways that we all internalize white supremacy, but told through anecdotes of my life. And my hope with it is really to sort of take away the shame associated with our implicit biases, because I don't think we're even able to look at those biases if we're scared to, and we're so afraid of shame. Like our culture is one of shame. So my hope is that I can say, like, I uncovered these things about myself. These things exist because of the society I was raised in. And even though it's not my fault that they exist, I'm accountable for them existing. And I just hope that it will allow other people to be more open to looking into those corners of their mind, because I think structural change is really important. Changing laws and changing structures. It's important work, but if we don't also change the way that we've internalized those things, then the structures will fail ultimately, because we do have laws that are supposed to be equal but that are not enforced equally. And so that's really a human problem. We have a lot of like legislative, political, cultural problems, but then there's that real human problem of how are we going to keep perpetuating these things ourselves unknowingly? So the book is really about how I've done that and contextualizing it in a larger sense.
Yeah, wow, that sounds so fascinating and needed. Was it sort of, have you learned about yourself in the writing process?
I think so. I think it's mostly just so many thoughts I've had for a long time, working through a lot of things that I have, and being able to kind of like wrap them up and tie them in a bow more than anything, to really like clarify them. Because I don't think I started writing this like several months ago, and then I realized it was mostly like me thinking and reading other things. And so the actual writing only started recently, but now it's like it's flowing so much because I've been able to like clarify those thoughts a little more.
Great. Yeah, I know it can be a big undertaking to write a book. So that's wonderful. I wish you a lot of luck in finishing it and excited to see it when it comes out. Yeah. So, Trish, where can people find you? Where, on Instagram and, where else?
You can find me anywhere on the internet. My website is trishes.com, and then all of my social media is at Trishes Music. And then on all the streaming platforms, just search Trishes, all caps.
Yeah, and I highly recommend your TED Talk too.
Oh, thank you.
So well done.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Trish.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay. Thanks so much for tuning in to Stories in Harmony. I'd be so grateful if you could like, subscribe, and rate our show, as it helps others find it too. In addition to creating a platform for people from all walks of life to share their stories, I help artists and entrepreneurs most powerfully share their brand stories to grow their businesses and magnetize their ideal audience. I also help with copywriting, narrative development, marketing emails, and a whole lot more. If you'd like to find out more about what I do or get in touch, visit my website at lauraferrero.co. A huge thank you to producer Darren Kim, who produces Stories in Harmony, and to James Breman for creating the theme music. Thanks again for being here. We'll see you next time.